Hello, my name is Bryan. Two things to know about me for today. I am a songwriter, and that is to say I am someone who enjoys taking life experiences and putting them into a form of lyrics and melody. And the second thing to know about me for today is I'm somebody who is passionate about helping those who are experiencing homelessness. So when I think of resilience, I think of one's willpower to put up a good fight when things aren't going as one anticipated. But there's a lot beyond how much fight somebody has to determine their success. We have to consider things like the circumstances and the conditions that they find themselves in as well. I like to think about the analogy of putting out a fire for this. And when we think about putting out a fire, you might think of a colloquialism that you might hear that somebody say, "Oh, I had a really tough day at the office today. I ran around putting out fires all day." The thing about putting out a fire is that you can't be in the fire, right? The first step to putting out a fire is always you got to get out to a safe space, and then you can turn around and put up a fight. And what I have come to learn from talking to people who have experienced abject poverty and homelessness is that sometimes the conditions in your life might be so combustible that when you run for your safe place, your fighting stance, you might find that before you know it, you've exited your life completely. You are now on the outside of everything you once knew. And that's what homelessness can look like, somebody who's had to bail on everything. And to an onlooker, that might appear like abandonment, or like that person didn't try hard enough. But actually, if a fire in your life is so pervasive that you have to run to get away from that fire, and you find that you've had to run all the way out to the street, then you're in a situation where perhaps you still have your resilience, but you've given up so much ground at that point that you don't know where to begin now, and you no longer have the tools to start. I volunteered at a homeless shelter where I had the opportunity to have these kinds of one-on-one conversations with people from the homeless community that began to influence my way of thinking and begin to get me thinking of it in this fashion. Those conversations were really transformative for me. They really broadened my perspective. And I wanted to share it. I wanted there to be a way that other people could have the same experiences. Folks that weren't able to access those one-on-one conversations like I had the good fortune to be able to do. And I thought, here I am as a songwriter, that's what I know how to do. Maybe that's how I could make that happen. Maybe that's how I could share these experiences and give other people access to this perspective. An opportunity came for me to do that when I started collaborating with a dear colleague of mine here at the University of Central Oklahoma School of Music. Her name is Dr. Tess Remy Schumacher, cello professor. And we started talking about the idea of bringing this to life. And she was able to secure a regular faculty grant from the Office of Research and Sponsored Programs here at UCO. And we embarked on a project that we call Quiet Kismet. My role in the project was to interview 6 Oklahomans who were experiencing homelessness or who had experienced homelessness and take the true stories that I gather from their interviews and render them into song format. And those songs were recorded, and they will be released on an album later this year by the same name. And part of the proceeds from that album will get to go back to nonprofits that we partnered with who are advocates for the homeless community locally. The goal of the project, though, primarily, is to take the firsthand accounts from these remarkable individuals and showcase their humanity and showcase their bravery far and wide to the world in a format that is very accessible and approachable to the average individual. And that's why we chose the song. In a recent component of this project, we had the opportunity to perform 2 live concerts in which we premiered these 6 new songs to audiences at local venues. And one of our guest interviewees did us the great honor of coming and speaking at those events. And we didn't give him any specific parameters on what we would like him to speak about. And when he got up on stage and addressed the audience, I was intrigued on what he chose to focus on for his discussion. He talked mostly about the first day that he and I met in that first interview that we had, when we sat down and we spoke to each other. And he told me that in that interview, in our time together, he said some things that he didn't realize he needed to say, and that he thought about his situation in a way that he hadn't thought about it before. And that through the process of explaining to me, essentially a perfect stranger, how one could view and interpret his situation, he was able to view and interpret his situation in a new way himself. And so throughout this whole year-long project, arguably, it was those first 2 hours that impacted this gentleman the most. When people think of therapy, often you will think of being in a room with a therapist, jotting notes and facilitating the conversation while you relay your deepest thoughts and emotions and share your deepest experiences. This kind of therapy is called narrative therapy because the person seeking therapy is invited to externalize their thoughts and feelings into a story narrative, to tell a story about themselves, essentially. Journaling is another popular form of narrative therapy, but utilizing the written word instead of the spoken word, and the mechanics are generally the same. As far as I'm concerned, songwriting too is a form of narrative therapy, in the fact that you are taking the nebulous experiences and abstract ideas of everything you think and feel and distilling it down to the most pertinent words and sentences, rendering it into that language format so it can be communicated to others as efficiently as possible. And being a songwriter, I have a lot of friends in songwriter communities who emphatically would agree with that standpoint and say, yes, songwriting is my therapy. I need it for my sanity. And I have certainly felt that way about songwriting myself. The bottom line is that all of these processes work by allowing the participant to categorize and organize what is otherwise a very scary mess inside our heads and package it in a way that it can be communicated to another, and thereby packaging it in a way that we can understand it better ourselves. People have asked me, why Quiet Kismet? What's the significance of those words for this project and this album title? And I used to think of that this way. I used to think of quiet kismet as synonymous with the idea of unheard struggle. And our point was we wanted to get this unheard struggle of these remarkable individuals more heard, more in the common vernacular of the general populace. But that title has evolved for me over time as I had began to think of everything in the context of what this gentleman told the audience at our live shows that day. And I've started to think of it not only as synonymous with the unheard struggle, but more specifically the unspoken struggle. Something that somebody's going through that they have not had the opportunity to articulate to another, and as such have not had the ability to articulate to themselves. The reason why I think this is powerful to talk about today is that I think the implication is that there is something that we can all do to make the world a better place. When you think about narrative therapy and how it works, the two mechanisms, the two simple things that it does is that it first asks a question, and that question is, how are you? And then it provides a safe space for that answer to be provided. Isn't that a question that we could all ask? Isn't that a safe space that we could all provide? And so it excites me to think that here is a tool that everybody in this room today has the ability to engage in, provide somebody. And I think that it becomes more than just a general nicety, and I think it becomes more than just letting that person know you care about them. It's a way that you can actually help them engage in some self-healing, help them help themselves through the process of making more sense of their situation. So I've become a big believer in this idea of donating one's ears. And while it might sound sophomoric to say that, because we all know, oh, of course, when you're wrestling with something, talking it out with somebody helps. Everybody knows that. So it's a commonplace concept. It's an ordinary concept. But I think because it is so commonplace and ordinary, we tend to overlook it. We tend to underestimate its power. And so I hope that what you leave this with is a sense of empowerment, that if you come across somebody who you think is struggling, somebody who you think has a pent-up narrative of their own, or quiet kismet that they need to speak, that they need to articulate, that you can feel emboldened to pull up a chair and invite them, tell me about it, and then follow that up with, tell me more. And I hope that you can feel empowered as I do, looking at it analytically in this way and the power of these processes, that when you are struggling yourself, that you'll be less hesitant to reach out for an audience of your own. Because we never know what kind of resilience we can unlock when we put ourselves into words. So today, I thank you for listening to others, and I thank you for listening to me.